So welcome, Chodesh Tov. Special welcome to the Oppenheim family who had said they're sponsoring the shiur without letting us know that they're even coming. In honor, I believe, of my wife who does all the hard back work for the shiur and getting it out there in the ways that it can. Okay, so last week we already started speaking a little bit about the Mishkan when we spoke about shkolim. This week we're really getting into the concept of the Mishkan. And first we have to just set the scene by the frustration many people feel when they get to these parshas. In other words, we like Bereshis, lots of stories in there, lots of things. We like the beginning of Shmos, with all the stories of Yetzias Mitzrayim and the Makos. Mishpatim gets challenging when it gets there, but then, unless you're really a craftsperson, there's endless. Really, nothing in the Torah takes up as much space as the Mishkan. Trumah, parts of Tetzaveh, parts of Kisisa, Vayakel, Pekudi, entirely going over, almost summarizing what was done with the Mishkan. And we don't know what to do with it. First of all, we say, we aren't doing this right now. Second of all, what am I supposed to get out of it? It seems like Lego. It's very complex. You go through the boards and the curtains and how they were connected and how they were arranged. What's there? What are we to do with it? So as I pointed out last week, the Ramban in the beginning of Sefer Shmos explains that the Mishkan was really the culmination of Yetzias Mitzrayim. Until we would be able to reach that state of V'shachanti b'socham, where HaKadosh Baruch Hu's presence would be inside of us to that extent, in this world, so we weren't really redeemed from Mitzrayim. We were supposed to reach that level on a national way that the Avos had, that they were called the Merkava L'Shechina. That was what the Mishkan was supposed to do for us. And that's something that's part and parcel of who we are. So the Sfas Emes deals with this question of what do we do with something that happened in the past? Hashem told them to build a Mishkan. They built the Mishkan. We don't have it anymore. Okay, we'll talk in a second maybe about where it's hiding. We had a Beis HaMikdash, right? And the Pasuk says, Vasuli Mikdash. That's how we know that the Mikdash was a continuation, a fulfillment of the Mishkan. But those were both destroyed as well. So what's there for us now? So he starts off with a medrash in Shmos Rabbah, beautiful medrash based on Shir HaShirim, where it says, V'yikchu li Trumah, Hadohu dichsiv ani yesheno v'libi er. That beautiful passage in Shir HaShirim, I am asleep, but my heart is awake. Kol dodi dofek, the sound of my beloved is knocking. Pischili, open up for me. Achosi, rayosi, yonosi, tamosi, sharoshinim lotal. Right, the beloved is knocking, saying, open for me, my beloved, my sister, my match, all the terms of endearment. So what does sleep represent? Sleep represents despair. There's a famous statement, it was either a Baron of Karliner or of Shlomo Karliner, who said that atzvus, sadness, is negative. Merirus, bitterness, is positive. He says, what's the difference between the two? When a person has the negative form of atzvus, what they want to do is to go to sleep. You just give up. You don't want to face life. You don't see a future. You want the pain to go away. All you want to do is sleep. Bitterness is positive because it spurs you. You want to change things. You want to do something. You want to make things better. Ani yeshena is a sign of when Am Yisrael loses hope. Why would they lose hope? The Medrash brings two examples. One is Ani yashanti li min haketz. That Am Yisrael know that there's supposed to be a geula, but it's going on for so long and it's not coming, you start to fall asleep. And the other example is Ani yeshena mimaiseh ha'egel. Again, last week we spoke about this as well. We don't really put ourselves in the shoes, so to speak, of Am Yisrael in that generation, when they were really reaching the culmination of everything that started in the creation. Everything that Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov set into motion. The justification for everything that happened in Mitzrayim, and something went wrong. And when a person crashes so badly, they lose faith in themselves and they go to sleep. They fall into this slumber. But what goes on? VaKadosh Baruch Hu martik alai. The Mefarshim say this word martik means to knock. Always knocking. Hevi v'yikchu li truma v'asu li mikdash v'shachanti b'socham. That knocking in that generation, and then later in the Pesukim of the Torah for eternity, takes the form of make a mikdash, build the Mishkan. That is the equivalent of Pischili Achosi Rayosi. That voice in Shir Hashim of the beloved who says, open up. What is he saying? Ad Mosai Eya Mishalich Below Bayis. HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, I am the one without the house. I'm the one without the home. Meaning that the world is supposed to reach a state in which HaKadosh Baruch Hu's presence is here. That's the Ratzon Hashem. That's Ratzon that's behind the creation itself. So therefore, he won't let us fall asleep. This is supposed to happen. And you have to be the ones who do it. Ad Mosai mishalech below bayis. The Shekhinah says, how long will I go without a home? Elo osu li mikdash, lo eya bachutz. Make a mikdash so that I won't be outside. Now, again, we know that the whole concept of a holy place is very tricky, right? Because we believe, Uncle Moshe teaches this, Mefurash, Hashem is here, Hashem is there, Hashem is really everywhere. That's one of the things we believe. So therefore, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is in South Dakota, like he's in Yerushalayim. Somebody told me that one of the breakoffs from Christianity, I think the Quakers or such, that was one of the things that they broke off from the mainstream from. They said, what's the idea that a church is holy? They just call it a meeting house. It can't be because God is everywhere. The idea is that Yerushalayim, Har HaBayis, the Beis HaMikdash, Eretz Yisrael, different places that have different levels of Kedusha means that these are places that we are able to bring HaKadosh Baruch Hu into ourselves and into this world more easily. Right? It's like somebody gave a mashal for this once. Right now there are radio programs floating through this room. How do I know? Because if I had a radio here and I turned it on, you would hear them. So why don't I hear them right now? I don't have a receptor. So the same thing, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is everywhere, but the Beis HaMikdash enabled us to receive, enabled us to be able to contact in that way. So now, let's take a look at what the Sfas Emes does with the Medrash. He says, Ha'inyan hu ki HaKadosh Baruch Hu kol matonos shenosan livnei Yisrael hem ledorei doros. Everything that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave remains forever. He says, the klal is brought in Maseches Tainis, Mishamaya meyav yohavi. From Mishamayim, from the heavens, they only give kibulei lo makabel. There's no taking back. It's not as if HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, that's it, I'm taking the Mikdash back. V'lochein, afilu achar shechatonu, even after the chatonim that we did that brought about the destruction, mikomokom ha'oros hamyuchadim lanu kayomim la'ad. The oros, the light that is the true content of the Beis HaMikdash, is there forever. Let's try to explain this a little bit better, because once you start talking about oros, people think that this is too mystical to relate to. The Nefesh HaChaim says that Titus did not destroy the Beis HaMikdash. Now we read the story and it tells us exactly what Titus did. But in the Gemara it says that when Titus was on the way back to Rome and he was feeling arrogant, so a Baskol came out and said, Rasha, this is what you're arrogant about? You felt you destroyed the Beis HaMikdash? Says, Kamcha techina katochant. You ground flour that was already ground. Bayis saruf sarafta. You burnt a house that was already burnt. What does that mean? So he explains. He says, only Am Yisrael can build a Beis HaMikdash. Only Am Yisrael can destroy a Beis HaMikdash. The Beis HaMikdash was destroyed at the moment when Am Yisrael spiritually were no longer worthy, no longer had the ability to maintain a Beis HaMikdash in this world. At that moment, the Beis HaMikdash ended, and therefore Titus was able to burn the shell of the Beis HaMikdash. That was what was there. But the mikdash itself is something spiritual, which is there. I've mentioned this before. I want to go over it again because it's such an important lesson for this. There's a Gemara that says, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Now, this is not Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, who was there at the time of the Churban. This was later Rabbi Yochanan. He said, if I had been there back then, I would have made the fast day on the 10th of Av instead of Tisha B'Av. The chronology was, in fact, that they set fire to the Beis HaMikdash at the end of the 9th of Av, and it burned into the 10th. So he says, if I had been there, I would have made the fasting on the day that the Beis HaMikdash was going up in flames. So the Talmud Rebbe, I just heard he's not feeling well tonight, he said, was Rabbi Yochanan really coming to criticize the Chachamim and the generation of the Churban? He said, no, he was criticizing himself. He says, if I had been there, I would have been focused on the burning of the building and said that they burnt the building, that's the tragedy. The Chachamim, by putting it on Tisha B'Av, says the destruction happened before the burning. That's what you have to mourn for. That's what you have to look at. And that's where the rebuilding happens. So this is what he means. The Beis HaMikdash is a spiritual construct. The lights that are meant to take their place in this world, in the Mishkan, in the Mikdash, are there and are always there for us at all times. So what's HaKadosh Baruch Hu want from us? Mitzapa Hashem Yizbarach liyosenu muchanim lekabel elu ha'aras. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is looking for us to make ourselves ready to receive that light. Okay? And that's why sometimes people, I don't want to get into the question in great detail, say, why isn't everybody working away like some people are and trying to make the materials for the Beis HaMikdash? Right? Some people work on trying to make kalim that could be used, all these different things. In reality, the main ability to build the Beis HaMikdash depends on our spiritual state. Then the technicals will come into place. Then we'll be able to work them out as they are. There is an idea, the Rambam does bring in the halachas, in the Beis HaBechira, the idea of building the Beis HaMikdash. He has such halachas. I heard from Rav Nevin Sal Shlita, he says that if there weren't the reasons that prevent us from doing anything, we would have to try to do what we can in terms of that. But the focus has never been on that idea of the building, but of becoming ready for the Beis HaMikdash to be able to come down. Now he brings the pasuk from Yeshaya, right, that we say in the Haftarah on fast days, Kasher yered hageshem v'hashelag min hashamayim, right? Just as the rains and the snow come down from the heavens, Hashem says, Ken yeh dvarei asher yitzei mipi lo yoshuv rekam. Those things bring fruit. Those things bring a response. HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, everything I say doesn't return empty. Okay, so he said, therefore, when I said va'asuli mikdash, this is the kol dodi dofek. This is going on inside of you all the time. That Jewish soul that wants, that yearns, that wants something, that's there. It's HaKadosh Baruch Hu knocking. This perhaps could explain why so many people are affected just by coming to Eretz Yisrael, just by walking in Eretz Yisrael, in Yerushalayim. They feel that their Judaism wakes up. Sometimes even if they're on a tour that's designed not to do anything Jewish with them. A friend of mine, he worked in Toronto for the people who put together the birthright trips. And he was always hoping that would affect people to learn more about their Judaism. His partner, who worked there, was always hoping that it wouldn't do a thing for their Judaism. And he used to always triumphantly show him letters that people said, since my birthright trip, I've started doing this, I started doing that. There was one woman I met once from Florida, and I asked her how she became observant. She said, through birthright. And I said, really? I didn't realize it was designed for that. She said, well, it was my first trip to Israel, and I thought I was going to learn all about Judaism, and I learned nothing about Judaism, so when I went back to Florida, I started taking classes, and that was how it happened. But Lamai said that when a Jew comes here, so that knocking becomes louder. It's there, the kol dodi dofek. The idea that you're supposed to, he says, it's la'ora osam tamid lashuv elav yisbarach. It's constantly awakening them to return to Hashem. Ubedoros rishonim hoya bihis galus. Now he says in the earlier generations, this was something tangible, something real. Yikhuli Trumah v'asuli mikdash. They took those materials and they made them. But nonetheless, mikol makom hu ledoros. It is there for all generations. Shemitzuvin livnos beis habechira. We're obligated to build a beis habechira. Now, again, if you look, there are some Perushim, the Malbim is famous for this, that really explains spiritually what each aspect of the Beis HaMikdash did. And the Sfarim say that mentioned the idea that the Kelim of the Mishkan were nignaz, they were hidden. There's even the phrase nignaz bimkoman. That means there's no place any archaeologist can find them. They're, so to speak, where they have to be, in their makom, in their dimension. And Sfarim say, like they talk about Hanukkah time, that when we light the Neros Hanukkah, the menorah lights again and influences us. They say even the way you tilt in Shmona Esrei, right? Arotze lahachkim yatzpin. You should tilt to the north if you want chokhmah. Why? Because the menorah was in the tzafon. So each thing, the shulchan transmits parnasa. Those things are there. But the building that we have to do is there for every single generation. He says, B'chol eish sheyiznadvu b'nei Yisrael, if we want to build the Beis HaMikdash, yicholin limtzo mevukasham, then they will be able to do so. Now here's where it gets tricky. Do we not imagine that there weren't some Jews who really wanted to build the Beis HaMikdash? The Chafetz Chaim was famous. He made a kollel for learning kodshim, for kohanim, so that they would be prepared. He really wanted it. How can the Sfas Emes say, "Yicholin limtzo mevukasham," that if you really want it, you'll be able to do it? So it connects to a beautiful parish he has on a Chazal that gets people depressed. It's in Yerushalmi in Yuma. It says, "Dor she'ein beis hamikdash nivne b'yomov ke'ilu nechrav." Some people like to grind this into people when it comes on Tisha B'Av, right? Another year. You know what Chazal said? They said a generation that the Beis HaMikdash wasn't built in their generation. It's as if it was destroyed. You people have just destroyed the Beis HaMikdash once again, right? And now the Sfas Emes in another place, he asked the question, he says, this can become very disheartening because we think about greater generations before us. Right? If all those generations, the generation of Rambam and Rashi and the Vilna Gaon and the Baal Shem Tov and all these people, they weren't able to do it. So how is our generation supposed to be able to do it? So he brings another pirush for this statement. He says, you read it differently. He says, if there's a generation, she'ein beis hamikdash nivne b'yamav, not in their days, with their days. We are all building the Beis HaMikdash with our days. A day in which a person wants to build what they can, wants the Ashras HaShechina in the world, has built a brick. If you want to build, you can build. And you are building. Each thing that you do, and that each generation can do. If there was a generation that with the days that they lived, they didn't build any Beis HaMikdash, that would be a churban. Okay, so we shouldn't become disheartened. And we should know that each piece, each progress that we can do is there. And we're supposed to feel that desire of that knocking. This helped me maybe understand the line in benching that I just thought I was just benching before the shiur, and I saw, we say, Rachem no Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem have mercy. One of the things he's supposed to have mercy on is Al Habayis HaGadol VaHaKadosh Shenikra Shimcha Lav, on the great and holy house that your name is called upon. So what is he having mercy on? The house is destroyed, right? And how do you have mercy on a house? Again, the idea is the very concept of the Beis HaMikdash is the Shechina that wants to come fully into this world. That's the concept of the Beis HaMikdash Shomala that corresponds to the Beis HaMikdash Shomata. That is something that's supposed to awaken Rachmanas. This image in the Midrash is very powerful. The Shechina being outside, homeless, knocking to be let in. This is what we're supposed to see and feel and wake up to when it comes to V'yichuli Trumah. Now, again, appropriate to our Rosh Chodesh, he says this is the hint that they said, Ba'adar mashmin al hashkolim. In Adar, they would announce about the shkolim. A friend of mine said a very beautiful thought. friend of mine from Boston. We were together in kindergarten. He's a rabbi in New Haven now. It says, mashmi'in al hashkolim. The word mashmi'im, it didn't say machrizin, you announce. Lahashmi'a means to get people to hear about the shkolim. It's emphasizing those who hear, not those who are announcing. To do it in a way that people hear it. Hainu, what this means, he says, is Shema'orin kol Yisrael min hashamayim. This mashmi'in comes from above. That this is a time in which you can understand this. Now, why is this so connected to Purim? You have to understand the backstory, so to speak, of the Megillah. Chazal in Maseches Megillah explain what was going on. The Vilna Gaon says that Anochi haster aster ponai. The pasuk that Chazal identifies where Esther is hiding in the Torah is a double hiding, a double Hester. What was the double hiding? First of all, it's true, they were in exile and they were under not only Achashverosh, who was evil, but Haman, descended from Amalek, who was there. Number two was there was a prophecy that they were supposed to go back after 70 years. That was a very nice thing to have, so to speak, compared to our Golus, which has no time limit. And if we look at what Achashverosh was doing with his party, they said Achashverosh was very nervous because his predecessors were already trying to count when the 70 years would be over. That was when Belshazzar made his famous feast, and he took out kelim of the Beis HaMikdash and drank from them, and he died that night. So that's why Achashverosh was nervous. And the Gemara goes into great detail. We learned that Gemara together, actually, right? It goes into great detail about the count that he did to make sure, okay, 70 years for sure passed, now let's make the party. And he made the party, and the kelim mishonim, Chazal said, were the kelim of the Beis HaMikdash. And Achashverosh even put on the clothes of the Kohen Gadol. And this is part of the criticism of Yisrael. Shenehnu misudasel shelosa rasha. They enjoyed the Suda, why not? They said he got kosher catering. But it was a Suda that was celebrating the end of your dreams, the end of your destiny. And nothing happened to Achashverosh. He was fine. So that was the tremendous disappointment and despair that Am Yisrael had. It felt gone. It felt like it's not coming back. So what Mordechai spurred them to do in that tshuva that they did, in all of this, was to know that it is never gone. It can't be. No matter what you see, the Shekhinah is still dofek, is still saying. And then even though we don't say Hallel on Purim, one of the reasons brought in the Gemara is Akate Avdei Achashverosh Hanon. Meaning, we start off the Megillah, Vahi b'mei Achashverosh, right, in the days of the king Achashverosh, we were subjugated to him. In the end, after the whole wonderful story, guess what we are? Still subjugated to Achashverosh. So we can't say that Hallel there, but behind it, in the world of Hester, the building of the second Beis HaMikdash was already getting set in motion. And that was what happened there. So this is really the story of what's happening and what we're doing. And that's how Purim connects so much to Pesach. We'll finish with this idea. When we have a leap year, recently we had a lot of leap years. So you have Adar Aleph and Adar Beis. And the question is, which Adar should have Purim in it? And most people would vote for Adar Aleph because it's been a long time since Hanukkah. Tu B'Shvat really didn't satisfy people's desire for a holiday that much. And Lama Lo, right? Why do you have to wait? And the Gemara says, no, we do it in the second Adar because we want it to be next to Nisan. Yemei Nisim. They're days of miracles. We want Purim to be next to Pesach. What does Purim have to do with Pesach? The exact opposite end of Tanakh, right? If Pesach was Am Yisrael coming out of Mitzrayim, so Purim is there at the very end. In terms of our year, it's the end of our year. Pesach is the beginning of a year. But what they're telling us is the following. Without Purim, it would be very hard for us to approach Pesach. Because you're sitting there talking about Hashem took us out of Mitzrayim, right, and brought us to Eretz Yisrael, Bana lanu es Beis HaBechira, and built the Beis HaMikdash. And some cynical person at your Seder is going to say, you don't have any of that anymore. You lost all of that. What are you celebrating? You lost it multiple times. It's not there. Purim is the answer for that. Purim is the answer that it's never gone, it's simply hidden. And it's hidden not just above us someplace, but it's hidden inside of us. B'toch kol echad ve'echad. And each of us that awakens it is able to make that personal Mishkan, right? And to bring this. And then can actually lead to that national mikdash. The Sfas Emes, just a beautiful thought to finish with. I realize I finished a few times tonight, but he says, you got to realize, when a Jew went to the Beis HaMikdash, most of Am Yisrael didn't do the avodah. The Kohanim did the avodah. The vast majority of Am Yisrael would go, and what would they accomplish? How would they do what they did? He said, they were Yisrael b'ma'amodon. They would stand there. Lo asu klum. They didn't do anything. Rak shoyu mizdabkin ba'ava v'rotzon ba'avodas hakohanim ba'levim. They would connect with ava and with desire to the avodah that the kohanim and the levim were doing. He says, so really the ikar avodah of most of Am Yisrael with the Beis HaMikdash was to connect to what the Beis HaMikdash was supposed to be accomplishing. And he says, guess what? We can still do that now. We can still do that today. He says, Chazal say, our tefillos are keneged tamidim, and therefore we can put it into that, and we can connect to that avodah, even the avodah that was then, or the avodah that goes on above. That's always there at that time. So it's something to remember. And a last practical note, many people point out, sometimes people are so poetic about the Beis HaMikdash and how much they want it built and what they would do with it and how they would treat it. He says, take a look at how you treat your shul. So the way you treat your shul is like a little test run as to how you might treat the Beis HaMikdash. How you behave in your shul might be a little bit of a test run. I guess we'll finish for the third time with a story. We haven't really had a story tonight. There was, I once told it here when there was a leak in the roof. In the town of Rimanov, back in Russia. So there was the Rebbe of Rimanov, and there was another larger community also, and they had their central shul. Anyway, the Tsar's officers came to town one day, and they said, we're looking for a building to nationalize. We need a storehouse for supplies for the army. We need to put them at different places across Russia. Strategically, we need a storehouse here. We're looking for a building. So the Jews weren't that worried. They didn't have very fancy houses. But then they saw the central shul, and they said, that's it. That's what we want. Okay? It's going to be taken from you in a year. We're going to fill it up with stuff. So they had a meeting of the, the important people in town, and the Rebbe came also. And they discussed it. The usual tactic Jews went to, first and foremost, then was bribery. But when they tried to see who they could bribe, they were told that nobody would touch a bribe in this because if it had to do with the military, that would be called treason. So that avenue wasn't there. And one man suddenly lit up. He says, I've got the solution. It's so obvious. He says, right now it's the summer. He says, what they want to store in the building are things like flour, foodstuffs, sugar, even gunpowder, things like that. All those things have to be kept dry. You know, and I now know that in the rainy seasons, the shul leaks like a sieve. It's totally unsuitable to be a storehouse. We just have to tell them, and we'll save the shul. And everybody smiled. That was a beautiful solution, aside from the Rimanov Rebbe. He says, Rebbe, you don't like my idea? He said, no. He says, why? What do you think we should do? He said, I think we should fix the roof. He said, but if we fix the roof, then it'll be a good storehouse. He says, no, you're not thinking. I'm sitting here thinking, why is it we're minding our own business? Come the Russian army to take away our shul. Would any of you leave your house leaking like that? He says, we didn't treat the shul with respect. That's why they're taking it away. Fix the roof and you'll see. And they fixed the roof, and a letter came that they decided to relocate the warehouse, and all those things were there. That also is a small way in which we do V'asali Mikdash in our generation. Have a wonderful week, Chodesh, Shabbos, etc.